Everyone remembers the masked man. Gloves, a gun in a cheap holster worn wrong, a backpack, a hand reaching up to cover a doorbell camera at 1:47 in the morning. For months, the entire country has been trying to answer one question: who is he? Investigators have his DNA. They have his movements on camera, frame by frame. They have thousands of tips from strangers convinced they've spotted him somewhere. And yet, nearly 6 months later, they don't have a name. But this summer, a group of retired FBI profilers started asking a very different question. Not, who is he? But is he even still alive? Because if you look closely at how he moved that night, the way he shielded his face, the way he grabbed branches to hide the lens almost theatrically, some of the people who've spent their careers reading body language on camera don't think they're watching a mastermind. They think they're watching a man who was already being set up to disappear. And if they're right, it means the real architect of this crime has been standing just outside the spotlight this whole time, watching a stranger absorb every ounce of public suspicion instead of them. Let's ground this in what's actually confirmed, because this case has produced more noise than almost any missing persons investigation in recent memory. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old, the mother of Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, living alone in the Catalina foothills outside Tucson, Arizona. She'd lived in the Tucson area for more than 5 decades, since her family moved there in the early 1970s. By all accounts, she was independent, active in her church, and close with her 3 adult children. On the night of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, she arrived at her daughter Annie's home at 5:32 p.m. for dinner. She was dropped back at her own house at 9:48 p.m. Her garage door closed at 9:50. That's confirmed by the sheriff himself on the record, down to the minute. Whoever dropped her off made sure she got inside safely before driving away. Sometime after that, investigators still don't know exactly when, a masked figure appeared at her front door. He was caught on her own doorbell camera. Gloves, a backpack, a gun holstered awkwardly on the front of his body. Blood, later confirmed as Nancy's, was found near the entrance. By morning, she hadn't shown up for a live-streamed church service she never missed. A member of her congregation noticed and called the family. Relatives went to check on her around 11 a.m., searched the house and the surrounding area, and found nothing. The camera had been disabled. Nancy was simply gone. Within hours, this became a multi-agency operation. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, Customs and Border Protection, search and rescue teams combing the desert around her home. No arrest, no body. Nearly 6 months later, this is still, officially, an open kidnapping investigation. One of the highest profile missing persons cases in the country, precisely because of who her daughter is, and precisely because, this long in, almost nothing has been confirmed to the public. Here's where it gets strange. Retired FBI behavioral experts who reviewed the doorbell footage for News Nation's documentary on the case flagged something they couldn't shake. The masked man's movements looked staged, not clumsy, performative. He covers the lens with a gloved hand, but doesn't rip the camera down. He looks around, grabs nearby branches, and arranges them in front of the lens like he's building a small set piece, adjusting it, checking the angle. That's not the behavior investigators typically see from someone in a panic, breaking into an unfamiliar house in the middle of the night. He's wearing a gun on the front of his body, in what one former agent described as a cheap holster. Tactically wrong for anyone who actually intended to use it in a hurry. Double gloves, possibly pants layered under jeans. A former FBI profiler who helped crack the Unabomber case, working alongside a colleague, later built out a broader psychological profile of this man based purely on that footage, describing his behavior as fantasy-driven, the kind of offender who would have researched restraints and surveillance in advance and likely ran dry runs of his route to the house before ever showing up that night. In other words, not impulsive, rehearsed. One theory from that same panel goes even further. He wasn't there to sneak in unnoticed. He may have been trying to get Nancy to open the door herself, knocking, maybe ringing the bell, banking on her confusion to let him in rather than forcing entry. If that's right, this wasn't a break-in. It was a performance aimed at a specific, elderly, trusting woman who might open her own door to a masked stranger under the right kind of pressure, at the right hour, when she was already home alone and unguarded. And there's a phrase one investigator used that stuck with true crime circles ever since. It looked like a lot of piling on, trying to distract from something else. The mask, the gloves, the gun, the branches, all of it potentially theater. The question true crime audiences keep circling back to is simple. Theater for who? Nancy in the moment? Or the cameras, months later, for anyone who'd eventually be watching this footage trying to build a profile of him? Investigators recovered DNA from the gloves left at the scene. In most cases like this, that's the break. You run it through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, and if this person has ever been arrested, ever swabbed, ever processed anywhere in the country, you get a name. They ran it. Nothing came back. No match anywhere, in a system containing tens of millions of profiles. That single fact splits the theories in two. Either this was someone with zero criminal history, a first-time offender, which is itself unusual for a crime this calculated and this rehearsed, or it was someone whose DNA was deliberately kept out of the system his whole life. Investigators have since turned to investigative genetic genealogy, the same technique that's cracked decades-old cold cases by building family trees off distant relatives who've submitted their own DNA to consumer ancestry sites. It's slow. It's methodical. And as of this summer, that process is still running. No name yet. Search efforts, meanwhile, have physically crossed a border. In June, an anonymous tip pointed searchers toward a remote area near Nogales, Mexico, prompting at least 2 separate ground searches in the following weeks. Nothing was found. FBI Director Kash Patel has publicly acknowledged that the Bureau was, in his words, kept out of the investigation for its first 4 days, a detail that's fueled its own round of speculation about whether the earliest, most critical hours of this case were handled the way they should have been. Meanwhile, a former FBI agent publicly needled the Bureau over something else entirely. Where is the enhanced photo? She pointed out that billboards across Arizona show Nancy's face, but not a clearer image of Porch Guy, as he's now known online. Her question, verbatim: are they protecting an ongoing lead, or is there simply nothing left to enhance? She also raised a quieter question that hasn't gotten as much attention after nearly 6 months. Why hasn't there been any public update on nearby traffic cameras or neighbors' ring and nest footage? In a neighborhood like the Catalina foothills, someone's camera likely caught a car that night. The silence on that front, she argued, is its own kind of data point. Now the money. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, ransom notes started arriving not just to the family, but to news outlets. One landed at a Tucson CBS affiliate on February 2nd, containing specific details about Nancy's home and what she'd been wearing the night she vanished. Details investigators asked reporters not to publish. Another reached TMZ the following day, demanding payment in Bitcoin, complete with a wallet address and a countdown. Months later, a third note claimed Nancy had died shortly after the abduction. Law enforcement asked that one be kept private too, and it wasn't publicly revealed until June 22nd, nearly 5 months after it was reportedly received. For most of that time, the FBI wouldn't say whether any of the notes were real. Nancy Guthrie addressed the uncertainty directly in a video message, telling whoever was responsible, "We live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know without a doubt that she is alive." By late March, in her first extended interview about the case, she said she believed the abduction was ransom-motivated and that she personally thought at least 2 of the notes were likely genuine, a public position that put her, in effect, at odds with what investigators would later suggest. Then, on July the 1st, the FBI's Phoenix office put out a statement, seemingly responding to a Reuters report that claimed all 3 ransom notes had been dismissed as fake. The Bureau's actual position was more careful than that. Some notes, they said, had been ruled illegitimate, but others were still being treated as potentially genuine. That contradiction became its own controversy. On the podcast Two Angry Men, attorney Mark Geragos floated a theory that stopped a lot of people mid-scroll. He suggested someone inside the FBI deliberately planted the story that all the notes were fake, possibly to cover for a mistake. His co-host, TMZ's Harvey Levin, filled in the alleged mistake. Investigators had reportedly sent actual cryptocurrency to the wallet address in one ransom note, trying to trace where the money went, and then told TMZ not to publish that detail, but apparently forgot to give Tucson's local station the same instruction. Geragos called it exactly what it sounds like, an internal screw-up, followed by people scrambling to cover their own territory. He's separately pointed out something that's bothered him about the letters themselves. One demand asked for roughly 1 Bitcoin, which by that point had lost half its value since the case began, and whoever sent it never tried to negotiate directly with law enforcement for any kind of protection or immunity in exchange for proof. To a veteran defense attorney, that's not how someone behaves when they're actually holding a hostage and actually want to get paid. One day after that FBI statement, a Los Angeles man named Derek Colella pleaded guilty in federal court not to the actual kidnapping, but to sending fake ransom texts of his own. Investigators say he'd been following the case on the news, found the family's contact information online, and texted Nancy's daughter, Annie, and her husband directly, asking if they'd sent the Bitcoin yet. A 9-second phone call followed. Prosecutors said his messages arrived within minutes of the family posting a video specifically pleading with the real captors for proof of life, meaning Colella was, deliberately or not, hijacking a moment of the family's most desperate vulnerability. He wasn't a suspect in the disappearance. He was something almost more unsettling, a total stranger who saw a grieving family's public agony and decided to exploit it. He's due back in court for sentencing in September, facing probation and time in residential addiction treatment, not prison. The U.S. Attorney's Office called people like him bluntly grief profiteers. His plea proved one thing beyond doubt. At least one of the messages tormenting this family was a total fabrication. Sheriff Nanos has said publicly that Colella isn't alone, that his office believes 2 or 3 arrests have now been made for fraudulent notes connected to this case. It also proved something harder to sit with, that even now, investigators can't say with confidence which, if any, of the remaining ransom notes came from whoever actually has Nancy. This is the part of the story that's genuinely reshaped how experts are talking about this case. During a 1-hour documentary produced by NewsNation, hosted by senior correspondent Brian Entin, a group of veteran FBI behavioral specialists, including a nurse who spent years inside the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit, the same unit that inspired Mindhunter, laid out a theory that's now spreading through true crime circles. The masked man on the doorbell camera may never be caught. Not because he's still hiding, because he might already be dead. Their reasoning goes like this. A ransom demand exceeding $1 million implies real financial motive. Someone who believes they can extract serious money from a wealthy, high-profile family, but a lone masked man wearing a Walmart holster, moving like he'd never done this before? That doesn't read as a criminal mastermind. It reads as hired help. One psychologist on the documentary called it a waiter and chef dynamic. Someone with intelligence and planning working behind the scenes, and someone else, less emotionally invested, sent to actually carry out the physical act. A gig, as he put it, a task, not personal, just a job someone else designed. A retired FBI agent went further, laying out exactly how it could have worked, step by step. Go to the house, disable the camera, help move Nancy out, then meet the person who hired you somewhere private on an encrypted app, a burner phone to collect payment. And then, this is the part that gives the theory its edge. Get eliminated on the spot. No loose end. No one left who can ever identify the person who planned it. Her exact reasoning was blunt. Could the mastermind really pay this man more than $1 million? Almost certainly not. So why would they need to? Another expert on the panel pushed the staging theory even further, describing the whole scene as way too performative. The branches, the gun worn in front, the double gloves, possibly pants layered under his jeans. All of it, she suggested, wasn't protection. It was distraction, deliberately piled on to obscure something bigger happening just outside the frame of what the camera could capture. And if the masked man could, in theory, lead investigators down the spider web to the center, as one expert put it, that's exactly why eliminating him would serve the real planner completely. Silence, permanently, wrapped inside what already looks like an unsolved abduction. If that theory is right, it reframes almost everything about this case. It would explain why DNA from the gloves never matched anyone in a national criminal database, because the person wearing them may never be found alive to test again. It would explain the theatrical way he moved on camera, a low-level operator following someone else's script, not a professional acting on his own initiative. And it would mean that the real architect of this crime has been sitting outside the entire investigation from day one, watching a stranger take all the public heat, while they stayed completely invisible. Never on camera, never on a tip line, never in a headline. It's still a theory. Nothing here has been confirmed by the FBI or the Sheriff's Department, and no second body has been found to support it. But it's the theory that's currently pulling the most weight among people who've spent decades profiling exactly this kind of crime. And it's the one that would explain why, nearly 6 months in, a trail this promising at the start seems to have simply gone quiet. It's worth saying clearly, this is one theory among several, and not everyone in law enforcement is convinced. Other retired agents have floated a personal grievance theory instead, that the gun was never meant to be fired, just to instill fear, and that whatever happened at that door was really about confronting Nancy over something specific to her, not a random abduction for profit or a hired job at all. Under that theory, the branches and the shielding weren't about hiding his identity from a mastermind's plan. They were about getting Nancy herself to open the door in confusion, face to face, for a conversation that had nothing to do with money. Others have raised the possibility of more than one person on scene that night, pointing to how much coordination it would take to move an 84-year-old woman out of her own home without a struggle loud enough for neighbors in a quiet, affluent foothills neighborhood to hear. Some investigators analyzing the footage have specifically flagged what looks like hesitation or inexperience in the masked man's movements, reacting, for instance, to the unexpected obstacle of the visible doorbell camera itself, as if he hadn't fully planned for it. That hesitation is part of what's fueled the theory that he wasn't working alone, and possibly wasn't even the one who came up with the plan. And it's also worth being honest about who's already been cleared. Early in the case, public attention turned toward Nancy's own family, specifically her son-in-law, who was the last person confirmed to have seen her, dropping her off minutes before she vanished. Investigators searched his home twice, once for roughly 2.5 hours, photographing rooms and bringing in forensic equipment. Cable news ran his name. A prominent on-air journalist called him a prime suspect based on an anonymous source, which the family has said caused lasting damage to their relationship with that reporter. But on February 16th, the Pima County Sheriff formally and publicly cleared every member of the Guthrie family, including him, of any involvement, and didn't mince words about it, calling the suspicion against them not only wrong, but cruel. He specifically noted the family had been cooperative and gracious throughout. Nearly 5 months later, nothing has emerged to contradict that. By April, the family had reportedly installed no trespassing signs outside their home, and a former FBI agent went on record dismissing any theory involving them outright, pointing out they had no signs of financial trouble, and in her words, a beautiful life from all accounts, which leaves the case exactly where it's been for months. An unidentified man on a doorbell camera, a family that's been both grieving and targeted by strangers looking to exploit their pain, and a growing chorus of experts who think the real answer isn't hiding in the shadows of that porch footage. It's standing somewhere just outside the frame, What's easy to lose in all the theorizing is what this has actually cost the people at the center of it. Savannah Guthrie suspended her broadcasting duties for weeks, including coverage of the Winter Olympics, to be with her family during the search. In late February, she said publicly, what a lot of people close to a case like this eventually have to say out loud, that her mother may be dead, even while the family kept holding on to hope. She's described waking up every night imagining her mother's final moments, calling the experience, in her own words, agony and unbearable. The reward money alone tells its own story about how seriously this is being taken. The family put up $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. The FBI added another 100,000. A local crime tip line added more on top of that, pushing total rewards past $1.2 million. One of the largest reward pools in a missing persons case in recent memory. And still, months of tips, 2 searches across an international border, and a nationwide DNA database search have produced nothing that's been made public. That's the part of this case that doesn't fit neatly into a theory segment. A woman is still missing. A family is still, by their own account, in agony.
And whether the answer turns out to be a hired hand who's already been silenced, a stranger with a personal grievance, or something investigators haven't said a word about publicly, the not knowing is its own kind of ongoing harm. One that doesn't pause for the theories still being argued about it on podcasts every week. 6 months from now, this case could be solved by a single genealogy match nobody saw coming. Or it could join the list of American disappearances that never get a clean answer, where the public moves on long before the file gets closed. What makes this one different is how loudly the theories keep evolving in real time, in public, on podcasts and cable news, while the actual investigation stays almost entirely silent. Somewhere between a masked man who may already be gone, a family that's been both mourning and hunted, and an FBI that still won't say which messages are real, the truth about what happened to Nancy Guthrie is still out there. If you have any information, the FBI's tip line remains active. 1-800-CALL-FBI. Someone, somewhere, knows exactly what happened in those 2 minutes after that garage door closed.